With NATO defence ministers meeting in Brussels, we'll take a look in today's press review at what the international media are saying about the US-led military alliance. NATO has grown in stature in response to Russia's aggression in Ukraine over the past year, after falling by the wayside somewhat following the end of the Cold War. So where is it now? Well, according to the New York Times, it's looking backwards. The paper writes, after years of facing threats far beyond its borders, NATO is now reinvigorating plans to confront a much larger and more aggressive threat from its past, Moscow. The NYT says that as NATO tries to reinvigorate itself, it is at the same time facing internal tensions, with member states divided over just how serious the threat is from Vladimir Putin's Russia. The paper writes, while some do not rule out a conventional confrontation, something Mr. Putin himself rejected as insane, others point to the potential threats shrouded in subterfuge and subversion, much like Russia's annexation of Crimea in March 2014 and its continuing support for ethnic Russians in the war in eastern Ukraine. Now, central to NATO's plans includes bolstering its forces in Europe, with the American Defense Secretary announcing this week that the US would be pre-positioning tanks and heavy artillery on the continent. The Financial Times believes that this move is an important strategic initiative, and one to be welcomed. It will not only help to deter the risk of future Russian aggression in Eastern Europe after Moscow's incursion into Ukraine, it will also inject new life into NATO after a long period when too many doubted whether the alliance served any purpose. So a positive step, but at the same time the newspaper warns that European leaders must do more to help themselves. This comes after a survey this week showed that spending by European nations on defence has in recent years largely dropped to below the threshold of 2% of national income, which NATO expects. And so the FT writes, European leaders also need to do some soul-searching about their willingness to use force to address external threats. They need to make the case to their own citizens that they cannot passively stand by while their security is subcontracted to America. Finally, we turn to Reuters, where John Lloyd is not so concerned with over-reliance on America as he is by the threat of nuclear war. These concerns come following a number of vocal nuclear threats from Moscow this year and increased flights of Russian nuclear-capable bombers. Lloyd says it ultimately boils down to this. The central question is the obvious one. Is it likely that Russia would launch a nuclear strike against a NATO country? The answer presently must be no. It is not likely, as a deliberate decision. Not deliberate, perhaps, but Lloyd envisions a scenario similar to the one in Kubrick's 1964 film Dr. Strangelove, where a renegade American bomber drops an atomic weapon, triggering the Soviet doomsday device. Lloyd says today such a course of events is possible, but a deliberate atomic strike is unlikely because Putin is rational, and he is using the nuclear threat rationally. He has decided that since the beginning of his third presidential term in 2012, he must portray the West as a menacing force on Russia's borders. The strategy is not only rational, it works. Russians now believe the West is once more their enemy. So East-West tensions showing no sign of thawing. Nuclear threats abound from Russia, NATO meanwhile responding with greater military deployments in Europe and an increasing number of military exercises. US Defense Secretary Ash Carter says he doesn't want hot or cold war with Russia. NATO members may be spared, but next door in Ukraine, active combat with Kremlin-backed militants continues. That's all we have time for today. Do join us again tomorrow for another press review. In Kiev, this is Ukraine Today.